So what I want to do, I'm just going to, for all of you, just go quickly through a lot of stuff about moving into government, what government technology is all about, the differences, some of the things that we've been able to do in government that I think were long overdue, that were kind of private sector things that were allowed by technology, but government wasn't implementing them. Some of the things that we've done in Boston, I'll go very quickly through that. And talk about some of the capacity and technology capabilities that we've built in Boston. And then talk about the marathon and kind of what that incident did in terms of testing us, and I'll kind of walk you through that process, and you'll see the impact of social media and other things as you go through something that was obviously very visible to the world. But it's really great to be back talking to everybody. I've been with the City of Boston now for 7 years as the CIO, and it's amazing to me when I come and talk to some of you guys that it's been that long. I mean, it feels like only yesterday. For those of you who don't know, I spent 24 years in the hospitality business, starting as a telecom analyst at Sheraton Hotels and working up the ranks of the IT organization there, and ultimately became the CIO at Starwood just after Starwood, Westin, and Sheraton merged together. Another fascinating story that I wish I wrote in a book someday. We will. Anyway, you all know Boston. I'll just give you a quick sense of the city and the organization that I moved into. For US standards, Boston is an old city. It's about 625,000 people. It's a growing city. It wasn't that way for a long time, but it is growing again. There is a major dynamic going on with people moving into cities. I think it was 2008 when it finally hit the point that more than 50% of the people in the world were living in cities. There are people coming back in. The things about Boston that people might not know is that it's a very young city. In terms of the people that are 20 to 34 years old, out of the top 25 cities in the country, Boston has the highest percentage of these young people, and that number is growing. Not surprisingly, we have lots of students. We have about 150,000 students in the city of Boston, and if you were in Boston last weekend, which is move-in weekend in Boston, and you work for the city of Boston, you see what kind of a change that means. It is amazing to watch the transition of the city from August to September in Boston. Boston is also a majority-minority city now. Back in 1980, the city of Boston was about 70% white, and now it's 53% minority. So we've had a big change. And just to give you a sense of the organizational size, we're a $2.4 billion organization. I mean, that is the city revenue. And there are 18,000 employees in the city of Boston. So it's not a small organization. It's pretty big. And we have a very strong mayor form of government. Tom Menino, who's been my boss for the last 7 years, is now hitting his 20th year as the mayor of Boston. And 3 years ago, he was the longest serving mayor in the history of the city. So he's been there for a long time, and we're going to go through a transition at the end of this year, which will be a big transition for the city of Boston. Brian, you had said, did you guys do any of the interactive questions or any of that? No, I know you're not going to do it. I was going to do who's been the longest serving mayor of Boston, and I had a list together, and the first one was Honey Fitzgerald, which was John Kennedy's grandfather. The second one I was going to sneak in was James Bulger, does anybody know who James Bulger is? No, he's not one of the mayors. That's Whitey Bulger. So if you think of all these poor people in Boston that are running for mayor now, trying to get people's attention, between the marathon, the Whitey Bulger case, Aaron Hernandez, there's been so much going on up in the area that these 12 folks that are running for my boss's job have just got no airtime, and the primary election is just a couple weeks away. But the big thing to know about Boston, what we think about, is the fact that we have this changing demographic, so the minority, the young, and from a technology perspective and from a service delivery perspective, it's really important for us to think about our customers. These are our customers. I couldn't use this slide for a couple years because the Red Sox kind of went off the rails, but now that they're back, I used it. So this is what we focus on. And so the big picture of what I do now, and lots of my peers, and any of you who are ever interested in doing some public service, I'll tell you, it really is, it's a great way to spend the times of your life doing what we do in terms of technology and managing organizations like this, is that government is really important to everybody. So think just for a second, not as a city employee or somebody who's just getting services from, think it's just from being a taxpayer, right? Government is important at a federal level, at a state level, at a local level, and it needs to change. So why is it so important for government to change? Well, because it hasn't. It hasn't changed enough over the last decades. And when I came in, I looked at it and said, my God, I can't believe that we're still doing, I mean, when I went into my office, so the information technology organization of the city of Boston, the first thing I heard was typewriters. I mean, that was 2006. I mean, these organizations take a long time to evolve. Well, why? Well, when I was at Sheraton, when I was at Starwood, boy, we changed a lot, right? I mean, every couple of years when I was at Sheraton, McKinsey would show up and then we'd reorganize because, the market was down or SARS happened or whatever, and then Starwood came along and we went through that transition. We were always being forced to change, or even in the internet, rise, having to, I can remember having conversations at Sheraton about how no one, with senior management, how no one is ever going to book a hotel reservation online, and what happened, there, and the growth of, the Expedias and the Travelocities, et cetera, and what we all had to do as organizations to survive. Well, government hasn't had that challenge, right? They've been able to survive. However, over the last few years, that's changed, right? The financial challenges that trickle down from recession, from Washington to Massachusetts, down into cities like Boston, our budgets are down. And service delivery, because of the bad economy, our services that we need to deliver to constituents keeps rising. So we have that challenge as an organization now. And the way I used to talk to the mayor about it is, Mayor, this is not a like to have, want to have anymore. This is a matter of survival. If you want to deliver services to the people in this city, you have to do this differently, and technology is a critical part of it. And in those first couple years, that was a challenging conversation because it was just different for everybody there. We've cut over that hurdle, and I'll tell you how we got there. But again, it's not just cities, but it's all of government. But cities are really important. And why do I think cities are important, and why has it been fun to be a city CIO as opposed to one at the federal level, is because we're doing stuff every day, right? This is the front lines. I mean, all of you live in some type of a city or county where you're having these daily services delivered. It's where we teach kids. It's where we plow the streets and patrol the neighborhoods. So that innovation imperative is more important, I think, at the city level than anywhere, because mayors have to get up every day and make sure that they're delivering services. And it's interesting, since I've been there, that there's been a lot more attention given to what we're doing at the cities. When I first got there, always had the sense, okay, you got this tiered structure, and the Fed guys and the White House CIO are the most important, and then there's the state guys, and then there's us little guys in the cities. But what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years is that mayors and city government are getting more and more credit for coming up with innovative ways to do things for their constituents. And so these couple things that I put up here, that rise of the mayors, that was the Boston Globe on last Sunday, talking about how, mayors used to be marginalized, but now are looked at as where creative ideas are coming out. Because if you think about the comparison of stalemates in Congress and things that aren't happening at different levels of government, meanwhile, at the city level, we're doing things because we have to. And so being creative and trying to come up with new ways to address the challenges that we have are now being recognized as leadership issues coming out of cities across the country and across the whole world. Metropolitan revolution, if mayors ruled the world. I mean, when I started at the city, there were no discussions about how important mayors were. And what comes out of all this is one of the challenges we have is, how do you connect the dots with all these varied jurisdictions, cities across the country and the world? How do we pull them together so they work in a more coordinated fashion? So we had this challenge to, how do we create Boston? Boston was recognized as a smart city. I remember when I took the job, my biggest fear was all the good stuff would have been done. And then I walked in and heard the typewriters, and I said, I guess it all hasn't been done. It was an enormous challenge for us to start thinking about how could we change this. And in Boston, and one of the things I'd like to tell you guys about is you have different ways you can approach this. And with the mayor's leadership and kind of my thoughts of how we needed to work through our issues in the city, we really started thinking about one word: engagement. How do you use technology to better connect with your constituents? That picture is Jane Jacobs. Does anybody know who Jane Jacobs is? So Jane Jacobs wrote a book back in the 1960s, the Fall and Rise of Great American Cities. And what she was talking about, she was responding to New York City, where urban renewal, top-down urban renewal, was hitting them everywhere. They were putting highways in, they were blowing up neighborhoods, they were doing all kinds of things like that. And her response to that was, you can't do that. You can't take the personality, you can't take the people out of cities. And that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. So think of it, the diversity of cities and the diversity of neighborhoods and the diversity of its people, that's what can contribute to what the personality and what the lifestyle is in any given city. So that was back in the early 1960s, and we have taken that concept of engagement, of making sure that everything that we do creates a tighter connection between the government and the people. And so today, our technology really can be viewed as an enabler of that empowerment, and that we want to make sure, I'll give you a stat about the mayor of Boston. They did a survey, goes back 4 or 5 years ago. He had personally met 57% of the people in the city, okay? So think of that, 620,000 people live in the city, there's another 1 million that come in every day to work there, and the mayor had met personally 57%. So I took that as we started framing our strategy for technology to say, okay, we're not all gonna go out there and meet those people like he does every day, but we now have all these tools. We have new technologies. We have different ways that we can create this connection between the citizenry and the government. We did believe that as a government, as a municipal government, we were doing a good job, but we were faced with this challenge that all of you see, which is there's a lack of trust in government. Are you really doing the job that I need you to do? And we felt that we could leverage some of the new technology trends and deal with this issue in a different way. And so, in Boston, we were lucky. We had a couple building blocks. So again, go back to 2006, 2007 when I first arrived. So these are the logos of 2 key organizational elements that we created after I got to the city. On the left side is the Department of Innovation and Technology, which we rebranded about 3 years into my tenure there. And the reason was we were MIS, right? It was City Hall MIS. I told the mayor after he gave me the job, I said, Mayor, you're calling me the city CIO, but you gave me City Hall MIS as an organization, because that's kind of what was going on. They were fixing PCs, they were, managing networks when things failed, but nobody was sitting at the front of the house. Nobody was really attacking what did we need to do with technology to drive forward. And then we created this other organization called the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. And so none of you probably know this unless you lived in Boston, but Tom Menino, when he got elected mayor of Boston back in 1993, they called him the urban mechanic because he wasn't a guy with a big vision. He was a guy who wanted to make sure that the streets were clean and they were plowed and that the neighborhoods were nice places to live, and they called him the urban mechanic because he would tweak on all these different things to make the city better. And we decided to take that name and to modernize it a little bit. And so we created an innovation office and called it the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. So think of it, this was important back in 06, 07, and I was lucky, right? I moved into a role that had just been created. So I had left Starwood in early 2006, and this was the middle of 2006. And the position was brand new, right? They had never had a CIO in the city of Boston that reported directly to the mayor and sat on the mayor's cabinet with, the police commissioner and the school superintendent and everybody else. And the good news was I walked into this role that was really well positioned. I didn't realize it at the time, but the better news was, even though it was well positioned, there was no definition to it. Because I asked the mayor, I go, what do you think I should be doing, boss? And he said, I don't know, see what you come. I mean, again, Mayor Menino's 70 years old. He's been a great mayor for 20 years. Technology has never been his thing. He didn't even know he was convinced by other people that he needed one of these guys, but he didn't know what to do with it. So the good news for me is I got to walk into this, reporting directly to him, having his ear on what all these issues were, but not, it was so different than my life at Starwood. Your management skills have to be different. You have to find ways to incent people to do the change management that's going to be required to do this job. So that's one of the biggest challenges. Other challenges like procurement. Procurement's I'm a lawyer by trade, right? I went in and immediately started thinking about the things we needed to do and needed to buy and talk to the budget office. And then they said, okay, here's your, $300,000 for Project X. I said, great, let's get going. They said, yeah, it'll probably be, a year and a half, 2 years, because we got to go through the RFP process, and this is, a Chapter 30 procurement, and it was really frightening. The other thing about public sector that I think is a challenge is the exposure to the press. It's amazing how organizations, particularly I think city organizations, they're always everything we do is scrutinized by the press. So it's interesting. This morning I looked at the New York Times, and if anyone looked at the New York Times today, there's a big story in here. City dismisses criticism of new 911 system. Okay, so New York has just implemented a new dispatch system for public safety. If you dig into this a little deeper, you'll see a paragraph that says Boston is also implementing the same system, and the folks from Boston are coming down to New York to find out what the hell happened in New York before we roll it out, because this has already been in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald. We're not implementing till, February or March of next year, and now we're responding to reporters who are saying, why are you picking this horrible system, to go in and, I have the fire unions and the police unions already coming to me saying lives are in danger, and this is the life that we lead in there. So that part of public sector, I think, is a challenge. But we do a lot of the same things, and think about, from a technology perspective, there's a lot of similarity. I put the phone on top because that used to be my life. It's hard for me to remember. When I started in the hotel business, I was the phone guy. That was, Brian will remember, others will remember. Hell, at those days, you can get into the Hospitality Hall of Fame by being the phone guy. I don't think that happens anymore. But now, but I know you have a lot of, but there's still some of those same challenges, right? So talk about broadband. I am sure that broadband is still a big deal for you guys. For me, it's a big deal because I have schools that need broadband. I need fiber to 125 schools across the city of Boston. I need wireless because everybody's doing online assessments and kids are doing, and to build out that infrastructure, it's no different than what you need to deliver in hotels now that you have people coming in with multiple devices and requiring more bandwidth. CRM, nobody in the city of Boston understood what the term CRM meant. Now, in my world, I turned it into constituent relation management, and that was the big focus, and I'll show you a couple of things that we did in that area. But that connection with our customer is a huge deal for us. And that has evolved, even in city world, to be a loyalty program. We're trying some things later this year that are actually going to credential people and badge people and recognize people for reporting potholes, or for a public works worker who's done a good job. We're, again, creating that connection between the city and the resident using a lot of these same technologies and themes that you guys are. Just to let you know what I was doing first of all, has anybody been up to the Boston Marathon? Okay. Marathon Day in Boston, in my view, is the best day in Boston. It's exciting, it's fun, it's usually great weather, and the event itself is just spectacular. That day, I was in our constituent center, and that screen up there I was working with IBM on a Smarter Cities project. And what we were looking at the marathon. We were saying, hey, we need some better tools to kind of see what's going on in one of these events. So, where are calls coming into the constituent center? So if something's happening, we'll see it on this screen. Where do people have licenses and permits for food or for parties or things like that? Get all that data and put it in one place. And we were out there most of the morning of the marathon. The winners came in, We said, okay, that's great. I handed a dozen passes to the finish line, to the IBM team and to my guys to say, go ahead, watch the rest of the marathon out there. And then, it was 2:50 p.m. where the police department tweeted this, and basically that was when the first explosion went off. My first reaction was I had just sent a whole team of people down to the grandstands at the finish line with their free passes. I hope everybody's okay. But this, to me, you never can expect this stuff. The one thing I will say is that from a pure immediate response perspective, I don't know what anybody could have done any better, right? I mean, the planning and the running of the Boston Marathon, to me, for years and years and years, has always been fascinating on how well the public safety entities and the coordinators for the race work together on this. And if you think about it, it was a horrible thing that happened, but boy, we had a medical tent that was sitting there with all kinds of doctors that became a trauma center like that. We had cross-jurisdictional public safety, emergency management, the ambulance guys, the cops, the firemen, all from all kinds of cities and towns there. The fact that we had practiced this. We do a thing called Urban Shield every other year where we bring all these different communities together and we do, hazmat drills and hostage-taking drills and firefight in a school drills and all those kinds of things. And the fact that it was already, predetermined if anything happened, what hospitals they go to, what was their capacity in terms of taking care of emergency conditions. And the fact that other than the 3 folks that died at the bombing, that none of those other people died. All the other 100+ people that were shipped to hospitals, everyone else survived because, again, Boston's lucky. We have great medical institutions, but the immediate response to this, I think, was amazing. But the technology aspects of it, I think are interesting. So I'll give you a multiple choice question. So right after the bombing, there was no self-service in Copley Square. Okay. So A, was it because we turned it off because we didn't want any remote detonation to happen over a cell phone? Was it B, just overload and the wireless capacity in the area? Or was it C, Verizon had a schedule change and wouldn't move it even with a bombing? What do you think it was? That's what I said to Verizon when I called them. But any ideas? Huh? It wasn't. It was B. It was the capacity. They just ran out. And so we were there talking to people saying, text, don't call, right? Because of the bandwidth considerations. We were telling people to get off the voice and text to people because maybe, but it was down significantly. And so we had to spend a good amount of time, with the carriers. They just need to plan better. You probably hear stuff about FirstNet. Has anybody heard about FirstNet? So FirstNet is the attempt for a nationwide public safety wireless network. It's a huge project. I think they've allocated $7 or $8 billion. But it's supposed to be the public safety wireless network. See, public safety does a great job with radios. When I went to the city, they started talking about LMR, land mobile radios. It was like when I went and they started talking about GIS, right? So back in 2006, again, in my CIO role at Sheraton Starwood, I never knew what GIS was. We didn't do maps and things like that back then. And when they started talking about land mobile radios, I remember, having push to talk for the housekeepers and the engineers in a hotel, but it wasn't in my technology repertoire. But that's still what public safety guys work on. They work on their public safety radios. But the evolution of that to broadband, right, is so you have radio people and you have network data people. And it's an amazing, sitting through these meetings as we try to transition public safety, because every time you deal with public safety, it's like that 911 system in New York. When you're dealing with these life and death issues, the immediate reaction from your customer is, I ain't changing anything, right? Because if I change something and something goes south, it's irrecoverable. But what happened here is we have great interoperability on these radios between multiple jurisdictions, so that communication worked really well. The dispatch side, if you ever listen to the dispatch activity during that first event of the marathon, you'd be amazed at how rich that conversation is with people. The carrier services are a challenge. We need to figure out how we avoid those kinds of outages in the future. Support services, so that call center I talked about, I mean, we normally get maybe 1,000 calls a day. We got, closer to 20,000 calls that day. Being able to ramp that up, get people to answer the phones, let them use the web, let them use those mobile apps so they can communicate with the city. Have them be on social media. Social media was important. Social media went crazy, during all of this, and it was really important for us to participate in that. But as this thing went on, I'm just going to show you some of the police department stuff. I mean, this was the communication vehicle. It was all about, Twitter. That's what people were looking at. Some of it, was broadcast news, but a lot of it was now on social media. The commissioner talking to people about, the fact that 3 people had died, telling people to be concerned. This was that activity that was going on right away. All the cops, so the Boston Police Department is on high alert. All sworn personnel working around the clock, 12-hour shifts in effect, days off canceled. I mean, everyone was able to see the seriousness of what was going on here. And then it wasn't just our, social media, but other entities like Reddit. So I don't know if anybody remembers what happened back then, but, during the manhunt, in Reddit, they thought they had identified, one of the suspects as a young man who had been missing from Brown University. They were wrong, right? I mean, and his name was all over the place. 3 days later, they found the poor kid's dead body down outside of Providence, Rhode Island. But as good as social media is, you got to worry about the challenges of social media and the integrity of some of this. Even as we were going through the process, the major news channels, so remember the marathon was on Monday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, so I think this was Wednesday, that the news was saying that they found somebody, right? John King, Boston Dorchester guy. They were saying that arrests had been made, but they hadn't been, right? So these were wrong. But it was all over everywhere. So even the bad news and the erroneous news gets, pushed all over the place. By that time I had been up. My daughter woke me up at 1:30. At 4 o'clock, I was with the mayor and everyone else, at the Parkman House, because the mayor at the time had just had surgery, was in a wheelchair, so he was at the Parkman House, which is a city-owned facility in Boston. And we were all there, the cabinet were there, and again, you're the CIO, right? So your range of activities then goes from, oh my God, the press secretary's BlackBerry doesn't work, which you all, to, we need to be involved in communicating with the public and our employees on what's going on today. The MBTA is not going to have service. Are we sheltering a neighborhood or the entire city? And those decisions were all being made between the mayor and the governor early in the morning. But basically, the city shut down. I mean, the city and the metro area. And so if you think about that, on a day in April, that an area of nearly 1 million people and 125 square miles just shuts down while people look for this suspect. And it was pretty tense around the city, but it was also amazing how everybody just did that, right? I mean, I was getting calls from my daughter over in Watertown because she was now surrounded by military vehicles everywhere. All she wanted to do was go walk her dog, and every time she would walk out the door, somebody would point a gun at her and say, go back in the house. So it was amazing to see what happened there. They lifted it, for anyone who doesn't remember, they lifted the shelter-in-place order. Later that, it was probably like 4 or 5 o'clock. And they hadn't found anybody, right? So they hadn't found us. So everybody was still kind of nervous. We immediately, as great parents, I finished my city stuff. I had been with the mayor at all his press conferences during the course of the day. And then picked up my wife and we went over to Watertown and were traversing through, all the military vehicles that were there, picked up her dog who hadn't got to go to the bathroom all day, took him over to the other side of town where my dad lives, and my dad, where my daughter was a block away from the original gunfire, my dad was a block away from what was about to happen, which was they found the guy in the boat, and there was now gunfire going on there. So the good news was, it was over, right? And I think, from our perspective, social media and the capacity that we had built at the city, the public safety technologies all worked out really well. I mean, I think the challenges that came out of that were things like the sharing of information between jurisdictions like FBI and state police, because I heard a lot of whining and moaning about that after the fact. From a technology perspective, we've invested more in social media tools, being able to mine the data. Subsequent to this, we were able to look at data in advance of events to see things that might be coming. So we got a lot better at leveraging that data. That Boston police account I was showing you had 48 million impressions in that 7-day period. 48 million. I mean, think about it. I mean, a couple years ago, we couldn't spell social media as a city, and now it's integral to everything that we do. This picture on the bottom is a picture of Mayor Menino hearing from Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Davis had just told him, we got him. So this is right after the boat incident. They had the guy in custody, and that's Ed Davis telling the mayor, we got him. And it got retweeted 20,000 times, and so this visual is an important part of how we were communicating. And the feedback we got after the fact is, as bad as being sheltered in place was during the course of a full day, at least people had a sense that they knew what was going on, right? And it was because we were able to participate in these new channels that not that long ago we couldn't. And then after that, it was the rebuilding part. We got, Twitter gave us kind of their top slot as we started talking about the One Fund. So we immediately went into the mode of raising money for the victims and raised $1 million within the first, kind of 6 hours of, and we think that the Twitter exposure was a big part of that. Again, this is the mayor speaking at the service that the president came into during the week. And again, being able to take his message and pass it out there and get it to all the folks, not just in the city, but in the metro area and the world. The One Fund ended up raising $61 million for the victims. And again, it's great to be part of an organization that does things like that so well. They got the fund put together, and again, from a technology perspective, oh God, we got to get the website up, we got to do all these kinds of things, immediately. But we had great support from lots of the technology partners, in the city. But they not only got the fund put together, but they've already done the distribution. They made a commitment that they were going to distribute those funds, because this wasn't about just raising money, it was getting it to the victims. And I think the victims who had deaths in the family or serious injuries each got over like $2.2 million. So all of that, as tragic as an event like this is, how the city responds, the state responds, the government responds, how we communicate during it all, I think is critical. And then this is as we're rebuilding now, so we're down on Boylston Street, all the businesses have been shut down, it's been an FBI scene, here's the mayor, kind of taking ownership back from the FBI of Boylston Street and Copley Square. That's our neighborhood development folks. We set up offices everywhere to help business get back on their feet, dealing with things like terrorism insurance and how do they do these kinds of things. And again, technology-wise, we're providing them tools and data to help them, contact and communicate with everybody. And then the other part of social media is we were getting all this great stuff all around the world of people who were sending messages of support and assistance to the city, and we were able to kind of use that and document this and share this. And so, as challenging as all that was, it was a great reflection on the city, on the people of the city, and how everything works. As a kind of cabinet member of the mayor, just kind of participating in that was really a fascinating thing, and been someone who grew up in Boston as well, and grew up in Watertown and Boston. I had it on both sides. It was really impressive. So.